Wars do not begin with bombs. They begin with a sentence, us and them. And the moment human beings become them, history becomes dangerous. Because once people are reduced to a category, their suffering becomes easier to ignore. Their humanity becomes easier to deny. And eventually, violence begins to feel justified. That is how hatred enters the world. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, one wall at a time. I know this because I grew up in the former Yugoslavia. And before the war, life felt normal, peaceful, ordinary. Neighbors lived together. People worked together. Children played together. No one woke up one morning expecting war. But slowly, politicians, media, and angry voices began speaking the language of division. Us and them. Us and them. Us and them. And after a while, ordinary people started repeating it too. Distrust and fear began replacing friendship, and invisible walls began rising between human beings who once shared life together. The war between Serbs, Croats, and Bosnians did not begin with weapons. It began in the human heart. Neighbors became enemies. People who once shared meals together began fearing one another. And eventually blood was spilled. That is where us and them always leads. And if we are honest, our world is still trapped inside the same story. Israelis and Palestinians, Republicans and Democrats, left and right, Christian and Muslim, liberal and conservative, black and white, immigrant and citizen, everywhere we look, human beings are dividing themselves into tribes. And the frightening thing is this. Most people think hatred begins with violence. But hatred actually begins much earlier. It begins the moment another human being stops being a person and becomes a label. Because once people become categories, their pain matters less, their dignity matters less, their lives matter less, and history shows us where that road ends. But this is exactly where the gospel confronts humanity. In Acts chapter 17, the Apostle Paul says something astonishing. That God made from one blood all nations of humanity. One blood. Not our blood and their blood. Not superior blood and inferior blood. Not chosen humanity and disposable humanity. One human family. And honestly, if humanity had remembered that truth more often, there would have been less hatred, less vengeance, and less bloodshed throughout history. But Paul does not stop there. In Ephesians chapter 2, he says something even more radical. Christ himself is our peace, having destroyed the dividing wall of hostility. Think about that language. Paul does not say Christ managed hostility. He does not say Christ reduced hostility. He does not say Christ made the wall lower. He says Christ destroyed it. Because the gospel is not about making division more comfortable. It is about ending it. And then Paul says something almost revolutionary. He says Christ created one new humanity. Not two groups learning to tolerate each other. Not enemies reluctantly coexisting. One new humanity. And that means that the cross is not only about personal salvation. It is also about tearing down the systems of hostility that separate human beings from one another. And this is exactly what Jesus did. Jesus did not enter a neutral world. He entered a divided one. Jew and Gentile, clean and unclean, insider and outsider, righteous and sinner. And everywhere Jesus went, he crossed the lines people had built. He touched the untouchable. He welcomed the excluded. He spoke with Samaritans. He ate with sinners. He loved his enemies. Because wherever Christ is present, walls begin to fall. And honestly, I think many Christians today need to wrestle deeply with this, especially when it comes to conflicts like Israel and Palestine. Many Christians approach that conflict through deeply held theological convictions. But theology and politics must never make us forget something more fundamental. Palestinian blood is the same as Israeli blood. Neither is less human. Neither suffers less. Neither matters less before God. Because the moment we divide humanity into categories of greater and lesser worth, we begin contradicting the very gospel we claim to believe. And this goes far beyond the Middle East, because us and them lives everywhere, in nations, in churches, in political parties, on social media, but the deepest walls are the ones inside the human heart. And that is the real challenge of following Christ. Not simply believing correct doctrines, but allowing Christ to tear down the walls within us. Because every war begins the same way. Someone teaches human beings to fear other human beings. Someone convinces us that people across the wall are less human than we are. And once we believe that, violence becomes easy. And history has shown us this again and again. Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Nazi Germany, the Middle East, different places, different flags, same lie, us and them. But the gospel declares something radically different, that before God, there is no us and them. There is only humanity, and Christ, who came to tear down the wall between us. And maybe that is why wars do not begin with bombs. They begin when we forget that the people on the other side of the wall were created in the image of God, with the same dignity, the same worth, and the same humanity as ourselves.